Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another nonprofit forum. Today we will be hearing what comes next for nonprofit fundraising from Lisa Wein. I'm going to give you a little bit of a bio for Lisa. Lisa is the Director of Donor Experiences at JewishColumbus, formerly the Jewish Federation of Columbus. Lisa has over 15 years of nonprofit event planning experience, and she spent 13 years in New York City working for various organizations. Lisa relocated back to Columbus 10 years ago, and she worked for CAPA for several years, planning and fundraising for all 7 of CAPA's performing arts organizations. In 2015, Lisa had several roles at JewishColumbus, ranging from her work to revitalize their women's philanthropy division to planning many large-scale community events. Most recently, she's been working to launch the JewishColumbus Journeys, which will be the restart of a missions program to include trips to domestic locations as well as Israel and beyond. Lisa's side hustle is LW Events. It enables her to consult with various nonprofits on event strategy, planning, and some of those clients include the Buckeye Ranch, Goodwill, Columbus, and the St. Vincent Family Services. And with that, I'll give you our traditional housekeeping. Today's forum is going to be a little bit different than normal, so please listen closely. This time around, this will be a lovely conversation between Lisa and I. We will just have some questions and answers from Lisa, and that will last about 45 minutes. And towards the end, we will have the Q&A section from the audience. But during this interview session, please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A box. So if you have content questions for the conversation, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. If you have questions about the forum itself, whether it's closed captioning or volume issues or something like that, please use the chat box for those. In addition, if you are looking for closed captioning, please look to the lower black box at the bottom of your screen. It says live transcription. If you click on that, you'll see that it says show subtitle. And if you click on show subtitles, you'll see the subtitles appear on your screen. You can click and drag those around your screen anywhere that works well for you. So do check that out. Additionally, this session is being recorded, as are all of our sessions. And what that means to you is that the link to this session will be made available to you by email after the completion of the session. So stay tuned for that. Additionally, as always, we send out a link to a survey at the end of this forum because we want to know how this worked out for you, and especially this format. So if you really like this format, or if you really didn't, please go ahead and let us know in the survey section. Additionally, if you like this time, or if you really didn't, please let us know, since this is the first time that we're doing this time for the forums. And with that, I would love to bring on Lisa.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for introducing a new format to us for the nonprofit forums. This will be the first time that we are using an interview structure, and I think it's going to provide a really engaging conversation. As I said to the audience previously, please start throwing those questions in the Q&A box. And as soon as we get to the Q&A section for the audience, I'll be sure to transition those over. But let's you and I have a chat. So we're here talking about how to return to nonprofit events, or what that looks like going forward. Do we return? Is there a return to the old normal? Is there a new normal? What is your take on advice that you've seen over the pandemic of nonprofit events?
First, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining. It's so nice to have such a large group. It's so cool. So thank you for being here. This is the question that I've gotten over the last 2 years, and it's really, what do we do with our events? And I think, now we're at a point where people are starting to plan in-person events again. And I think it's really still up to the individual organization and their board to determine what their comfort level is with returning to in-person events or not. what I've seen happening a lot is a trend towards planning outdoor events, so that you're kind of removing some of the comfort, the uncomfortability around COVID. And I'm also seeing, for catering, to do things more as individual servings as opposed to like platters. I know that's something that people are concerned about too. So I think the pandemic has kind of led to event planners thinking more creatively about how they can do events in person safely. And there's definitely ways to do it. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the past 2 years is that virtual events take just as much time to plan, sometimes even more, because we don't know as much about how to do them. And they're also costly too. And a lot of people ask me, we want to do an in-person event, but what do we do for the people who don't feel comfortable coming in person? Should we do a hybrid event? Should we not? And the answer is, I'm not sure what the best choice is, but the thing to keep in mind is that when you are doing a hybrid event, the technology that's needed to make that virtual aspect work really well and look professional is expensive. It's like planning 2 events at the same time. So you have to really be realistic about that and understand what goes into it and think about what your bandwidth is. And if there are people who can't attend your event in person, they don't feel comfortable, use that as an opportunity to engage with them in another way. Those are really the best suggestions I can give. And unfortunately, right now people are starting to think about going back to in person, but we all know that things can change at any moment. So we have to be flexible, and which is, an interesting trait I've had to learn being an event planner over the past 2 years, is being more flexible. So I think that that's really the key to success, and kind of being open-minded about creative ideas. So there isn't one answer that works for everyone, unfortunately.
So just to attempt to kind of put a pin in what I think that you might be alluding to, is that and you correct me where I'm wrong or misunderstanding, but is that we will be seeing a return to in-person events. And I know that we can't say that with any certainty because COVID is not at all certain, but it sounds like you suspect that we are seeing a return to that in-person event status that will probably not go back unless there's some incredible resurgence of COVID. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think at a certain point, we all have to assume the risk if we want to have an in-person event, because unfortunately, I think we all realize that we may have COVID as part of our lives in the, going forward. And what does that mean? I think for nonprofits, in-person events are really important, and we're going to have to figure out a way to do them safely and make sure that your messaging in advance of your event is very clear what your COVID policies are, and do the best you can to, remove any cross-contamination, and, doing the best you can. Having things outdoors seems to be the best solution. And it's really funny because when I lived in New York City and planned events there, my main rule was to never do an outside event if you could avoid it. Now that's really like the best thing to do. Then we worry about weather, and in Ohio, obviously, who knows? So we just kind of have to be flexible. And I think, telling your attendees, this is an outdoor event and it's going to be what it's going to be. If you have the flexibility to have a rain date, then you do. But I think we've all learned that we kind of have to go with the flow and do the best we can to bring people together.
I want to revisit something else you said regarding hybrid events. It sounds like, so I've been hearing a lot more conversation around the utility of a hybrid event. And it sounds like you're saying that those events can be hairier than we may think they are. Can you go into that a little bit more? What's behind a hybrid event?
If you think about what's happening, just for example, if you think about what's happening on stage at your in-person event when you have a program and people are speaking, in order for the people at home to be able to see that, hear that, understand, feel engaged, the technology involved in showing that in a really high quality way costs money. So you have to think of the additional cameras that you need, the additional hookups that you need, and, you know, streaming live, that's a whole other cost. And it's also a stress that over the past 2 years, sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't. And that's really stressful. So, I mean, just think about the production that would go into making sure that what people are seeing in person, they're able to feel that same feeling at home. You're not just going to plop a camera, you know, in the room where an event is happening and that's what people see at home. You know, it has to be something that's really focused with multiple camera angles so they're capturing things. That's expensive.
It sounds like you're describing it as more of a TV production is as a tandem to the in-person event that you're planning. So are there vendors that specifically do this work? Typically, how if the nonprofit really wanted to engage in a hybrid event, where would they go with that?
I think any AV company, you know, some do it better than others, but they've developed that, you know, that technology that they figured out how to shoot those events in a way that makes sense for hybrid. I'm not a technology expert. One of my mottos is trust the experts, and AV is one of those places I go to. If someone wants to do a hybrid event, I would talk to some of my partners and say, this is what we want to do. What goes into that? How many cameras are we going to need? What does sound have to be like for people to really have that experience? The other piece of it too, for virtual and hybrid, I think, is that people are really tired of just logging on and you know, watching these virtual events. There was something new about it in the beginning of the pandemic. That newness has worn off, that excitement has worn off. And I think we have to figure out ways to make it really engaging for people that aren't there. And that's really hard to do if you're trying to pull off an in-person event at the same time.
To that same end, can you talk a little bit about some of the takeaways and things that you feel like you've learned during the pandemic that you can apply going forward to your event planning?
For sure. You know, a lot of things. I think we've all experienced that leaving the house takes a little extra effort these days. So I'm encouraging anyone that I'm talking to about their events to really take into consideration how much time their attendees want to spend with them. I mean, all of our nonprofits are, you know, valuable, amazing, do incredible work, but we're in it every day and we know that. But everyone's time is valuable. Everyone is pulled in a million different directions. And I think now more than ever, it's going to take a lot more for people to leave their house and come to an event. So what I've really learned over the last 2 years and how I'm going to apply it forward is thinking about creating an event that's really compelling and engages people, that's more of an event experience. I think the days of just having, you know, people talk at a podium and talking about how amazing the nonprofit is, I think those days are kind of over. I see events in person still having that, you know, half hour, 45-minute, hour cocktail reception part. So people have the networking opportunity because that's what funders really want. You still want to have that. And then I see the program as being a little bit shorter and speaking directly to where the dollars are going. I think there has been this tradition for, you know, a million years of how to do events, how to do fundraising events. And it's kind of had one model of having these sponsorship levels, and that includes a table of 10 and all these other things. But the one thing that I've seen that's missing is the impact that that sponsorship does for the organization. So on that token, I think you want to take that into your event and make sure that the story you're telling is connecting donors to where their dollars are going. That's why they invest in the organization, and that's why they're there. They want to know where their money's going. And I don't think people are that interested. And this isn't, across the board. This is just my opinion. I don't think people are that interested in these 3-course meals anymore, and open bar and all that stuff. I think they want to see their money going towards the organization. And I say all the time, we're in the business of raising awareness and raising money, not in entertaining people. I think that there's a way to tell your story that can be entertaining, but that really needs to be the focus.
So you mentioned in this explanation about a compelling event. And I think those may have two different things depending on whether the event is virtual or in person. But can you talk a little bit about what that compelling event means, what it looks like, and how can a nonprofit organization reach that compelling event without exorbitant costs?
Yeah, that's hard, but there is a good answer. I mean, I think depending on what your mission is, it's really important to set goals for your event and then prioritize those goals. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes I see across the board is nonprofits focus so much time and energy on what's going to happen at the event, the logistics and the vibe is, how it's going to feel, the food and all those things. That stuff is really important, but that's not the best place to start. So I think, looking at your year as a whole and seeing how your events fit into your overall fundraising and engagement strategy, how can your events be a vehicle for building relationships with your donors? And I think it's really important to set goals. What do we want this event to do? And once you figure those out, you create an event that helps you accomplish those goals instead of the other way around. I mean, I think a lot of the disconnects that nonprofits see when they have these events is people are still not getting what their mission is. It's because they're not spending enough time creating those connections in a way that people walk away really getting it. Sometimes that's because they try to do everything in one event. They try to tell their whole story in one event. And all of the nonprofits in Columbus do a million things, and they're all really important, but you can't tell that entire story in 30 minutes. So I think, like I said, setting goals and then prioritizing them. And I think working backwards from what do you want people to walk away from your event thinking, feeling, wanting to do next with your organization. And that's the most important thing, because events, in addition to raising money, if it's a fundraiser, they should be, like I said before, a springboard for, building relationships with donors. They should be an opportunity for following up and, furthering that connection with your donors who took time out of their day to come. So I think that's the most important place to start. When it comes to creating an event that's interactive and immersive, I think, your story is really what's going to make that, make those things happen. So, for example, with JewishColumbus, a few years ago, we were planning our annual meeting, and we wanted to do something different. It had been the same kind of, event every year, where we basically were just telling our donors about, these are the statistics, this is the money we raised with our annual campaign, this is the amount of people we helped, these are the programs we have, all this stuff that's really important information, but isn't always the most interesting when it's just someone, talking for a half hour. I mean, think about how you feel. Like, do you want to go to an event and just listen to someone talk to you? Like, that's not that interesting. You could stay home and watch a webinar and do that. So I think if you're going to bring people to a place, you want to create an environment where they can learn about the work you do in a more interesting way. So for that event, I wanted to create an environment where people could engage with the programs in a way that they hadn't before. And some of the programs that we focused on were Jewish Summer Camp, PJ Library, which is a book program where we send free books to kids from 0 to 11 with Jewish themes. and there are a few other things. So in the venue, I set up in the middle of it a campsite. And then I had a camp family there talking to people about why they send their kids to Jewish summer camp. For PJ Library, we set up a bedroom, a child's bedroom, and we had all the PJ Library books there so people could look at them. And we had a PJ family there saying why the books, mean so much to them and their kids. We set up another table. We set up a table that was like a gorgeous Shabbat dinner, which is what we do on Friday nights, where we kind of bring our family together and talk about our week. And at the time, our young JewishColumbus programmer under 40s, they were doing these Shabbat dinners to kind of bring new people into the fold so they could learn about how they could get involved with JewishColumbus. So we set up this gorgeous table with real food and candles and everything. And then we had those under 40 people there talking about, why they are involved. So I think people walked away from that event, like really understanding the programs that we offer. And they, now, people ask me about that event. That was in 2015, and people still ask me about it. They still remember it. So I think, giving people that opportunity to like walk around and look at these things and have conversations and ask people questions. It was, a dynamic, immersive experience that helped people really understand the work and where the money was going.
So it sounds a bit like you're telling us to not be afraid to scope our events. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one event per year that we stuff everything that we do into the one event, but that we might find more value in focusing on something specific that we do and really creating an experience around that specific thing. What are your, sorry, go on.
Definitely. On that note, another really important piece I think to think about is that when you're thinking about your events, not every event has to be a fundraiser. That's really important when you're setting your goals and figuring out what this event is. I think a lot of times people think every event has to have a fundraising component, and that's not the case. You can do events that are purely focused on engagement and stewardship. The idea of putting all your time and effort and stress and anxiety into raising money on one night is like, that's a lot. And that's stressful. And that's the way it's been done for a long time. And it's not that you shouldn't do that, because there is a good reason to do that sometimes. But, I've been having a lot of conversations with funders lately because I want to kind of understand what they are looking for from nonprofits. And I think we've all experienced, even before the pandemic, that, corporations who are sponsoring our events have a hard time filling those tables. And that was the case before the pandemic, and it's going to be even more so now. So I think it's thinking about, what we want that experience to be for the people coming through the door, and being more focused on the donor experience and seeing it through their eyes, and making sure that we're communicating their impact and showing them how it manifests in the organization.
Okay. So I have a question for you around sort of the accessibility of events. And I know that the one thing that has been really nice about the world being virtual is that fully virtual, because you've made your point certainly about hybrid being far more intensive than I think we expect. But when the world is fully virtual, we have a lot more tools at our fingertips that make events accessible to nonprofits of all different sizes and budget sizes and staff sizes. In a return to in-person events, how do you help bridge the gap for nonprofits that have kind of figured out to some degree the virtual world, but will now need to then compete, if you will, with in-person events and may not have the staff size or budget size to do that?
That's a really good question. I think it goes back to really looking at your year as a whole and seeing, prioritizing what you need to do that year. Not not everything needs to happen through an event. You know, we all have annual campaigns. We have different, you know, fundraising streams that help us reach our goals each year. And I think it's really important to look at that and evaluate whether having an in-person event is still something that will be impactful for the organization. Is it, number one, going to still be impactful? Number two, if it's not, and we need to figure out a different way to bring people together, what does that look like? Do we want to have more focus on our one-on-one donor solicitation and asking individual donors and corporate sponsors for one gift a year? And you have that conversation once, and then you say, we're going to have a couple events throughout the year that are more for engagement and stewardship. And, you know, we want you to come so that we can thank you and so that you can see where your dollars are going. I think it's just really important to have, you know, a realistic conversation about what you need to do this year, and are events the best vehicle to do it? And I think that's hard for a lot of organizations because they're used to doing things one way. So it's hard to answer that question, because I know for a lot of nonprofits, events are really stressful. But I think that there's a way to kind of reflect and figure out whether it still makes sense to do them in the way that you used to. And if it's not, figure out what is going to work for you now. I think now more than ever is a time for nonprofits to reinvent the way they do things. It's been 2 years since most of them have had an in-person event. And this is the opportunity to change the way you've done things before. Events and nonprofits by nature, in my experience, are very traditional and are very used to saying, you know, this is the way we've always done it and we're not going to change it. I think now, you know, you still may run into that, you know, that's always going to be there. But now more than ever is your opportunity to say, you know what, we've learned a lot over the last 2 years. We want to engage our donors differently, and this is our chance to change it, and let's reinvent it. Let's be creative and think outside the box about how we're going to connect our donors to our mission. And events can definitely do that, but they're not the only way.
So I think there are some things that you said for organizations of all sizes in the response to that question. Really making sure that you are thinking through your strategy around events and fundraising and donor support through the year. So instead of, you know, planning it mid-year, thinking in the beginning or even the year prior around what is the role for events in your organization. The other thing I think I heard you say goes back to the scoping concept of, you don't necessarily need one giant event that fits the needs for every single person that you interact with, but maybe it makes sense to have 5 or 6 smaller things that are targeted towards specific people and really nurturing those one-on-one relationships. So I think that's something that orgs of any size can take away from that thought process. So you started talking about some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen nonprofits make during the pandemic with in their event space. Can you walk us through some of those mistakes just so that we don't hit any bumps ourselves?
For sure. I think the 2 I mentioned already are starting off thinking about event planning instead of why we're doing the event. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation about, you know, an event that someone wants to plan, and they're so excited about what this event could be and the speaker they're going to bring and all that stuff. And my question as they're talking is always, why are you doing this? Do you know why you're doing it? A lot of times they don't know why they're doing it. That's really important. Sometimes, you know, great ideas are just great ideas, but that doesn't mean that they have to actually be turned into an event. And one of the things that I developed at JewishColumbus over the past couple of years, we have this 3-phase process, and it's idea, evaluate, execute. So someone comes to me with a great idea. I have a list of reflective questions for them to kind of answer, and we kind of go through it and we kind of measure, does this fit within our strategic pillars? Yes or no? And if it does, then we talk about the execution. It's really important to do it in that direction as opposed to the other way around. So that, I mean, because a lot of times when you're answering those reflective questions, you realize, you know what, this is a great idea, but we don't need to be doing this. That's not for our organization to do. It's for our partner agency to do or something else. So I think that's really important. And that kind of came about because before the pandemic, we were doing so many events and we realized that we were bombarding our donors with so many emails and, you know, so many opportunities to do things. And part of why my title changed to Director of Donor Experience is because I'm trying to take a holistic view of what our donors are experiencing by being a part of our organization. And I think it's really important to be looking at it from that perspective. We need to kind of move away from talking about how great we are to talking more to the donors about what they're interested in. That's really, really important. And it's easy to kind of forget, you know, they're here, they're giving us money, they're coming to things, they must love us. But you need to have those conversations with them. And that helps you develop a much deeper relationship with them, which in turn will bring more dollars your way in the future. So I think that that's really important. The other one I mentioned is, you know, making sure you understand whether your event needs to be a fundraiser or if there's a more effective way to raise money. You know, I think it's really difficult when for funders and for individual donors to feel like an organization they care so much about is constantly asking them for money. No one likes that. So is it possible to think about, you know, what we can ask that company or that person to give us for the year and have that conversation once. And then the rest of the year is all about stewardship and relationship building, because you don't want every conversation with your donors to be transactional. You want to be building those relationships. And I know I sound like a broken record, but fundraising is all about building relationships. At the end of the day, no matter how cool your event is, people do not come because the event is cool. They come because their friends ask them to. And those friends are there because you've made that connection with them. So that's really the most important thing, is focusing on your donors and what they care about, and then figuring out a way to make sure that they feel appreciated and that they feel connected to the work. So that's really important. The other thing too, and this is a really short answer, easy one. I think the measurement of success for nonprofits over the past few years has really been too focused on how many people we can get to this event. You know, we have to hit 300, we have to hit 350, whatever. And if you don't, then it's considered a failure. And I think if we all take a step back and look at that and think about those 300 people that came to the event all those years, like how many of them are actually engaged in the work that you do? Probably not that many. I would suggest when you're thinking about your event, like I said before, that you want to have that networking moment for them, and then you want to have that mission moment where they're connecting to your work. And that really needs, the people who need to be there to hear that are the donors who really care about, you know, the mission. They're already really connected, asking them to maybe bring a couple of their friends so they can hear it too, hear what they're passionate about. And then when you're thinking about funders, you know, you want to make sure that they really, the people that are coming are the ones who need to know more about your organization, the ones who, like the community relations person, the foundations person, and having that conversation with them and saying, you know, who from your company really makes the most sense to come and hear more about what we're doing, because this event is going to be all about the impact you have on our community. That you can bring as many people as you want. We're not asking you to fill a table of 10. We're asking you to bring the right people. It's so much more impactful for the organization to have the right 3 people as opposed to the wrong 10 people. So I think that, you know, it's quality, not quantity in that case. And that's a real shift from the way events have been in the past. And I think it's a much better direction to go. Then lastly, the most important thing that I've learned over the years, and what I've seen happen across nonprofits in New York and Columbus, is there's so much time and energy and work that goes into planning the event and making it amazing. And then the event happens, and then you don't talk to people until the next year. So, I mean, it's like, you're just leaving money on the table when you do that. If you don't have a follow-up strategy in place, that's part of your planning process, you're going to lose out on building those connections with people, following up with them and saying, what brought you to our event? What did you learn that you want to learn more about? How can we connect you further? What can we do to get you more involved? That's the biggest hole I see going across the board with regards to nonprofits, missing one piece. And it's as simple as putting time on your calendar, blocking time on your calendar in advance for the week or two after your event, specifically to follow up with people. And that can be your development team. And you can also be utilizing your board to do that too. Say to them, as being a part of this, we really want you to help, expand our reach and be our ambassadors, and put some time on your calendar just to follow up with people. We'll send you 5 people to connect with. We'll give you bullet points, make it easy for them. But that's really important. And the other part of it too is for an in-person event and for virtual, but more for in-person, once you see who's coming to your event, taking time the week before the event, block time on your calendar to look at that list and see who's coming, and assign people in your, in your organization to make sure they say hello to those people. Make sure you connect with them. Assign those people to your board members. Really be strategic. You have all these people there. Use that time to your advantage. They're there, connect with them, have those conversations. Even if you just say, thank you for coming. I'm going to email you next week for a coffee. I mean, that's so important, but you have to take the time to do that. And I think nonprofits spend so much time worrying about the logistical stuff, the stressful stuff that happens on event day, that they don't take the time to have those strategic conversations. And that's a huge missed opportunity.
I think that something you've said there really resonates for organizations that may not have a development team or may not have a development staff person, is utilizing your board as an extension of the org in helping to forge those relationships. So, having the conversation in advance, as you said, about who will be attending the event, and after the event's over, having a conversation with your board about what follow-up looks like. There are a number of organizations who do not have development directors. And so what you have said about being strategic about how you use events, and not always necessarily thinking that the event has to be really super big, I think will be to the advantage of our small to medium-sized organizations. So if we have a few small events, it might be a less taxing lift than trying to create a whole gala and needing to then do the follow-up or the pre-work or the follow-up, et cetera, especially if you don't have the staff necessarily to pull that off. So I thought that was some great insight.
Yeah, and I think on that note too, one of the most important things you can do with whatever the volunteer structure is around your event is to make sure that you are setting expectations for what you're asking them to do, creating roles and responsibilities for them, whether it's your board or an event committee, whatever name you give that group. It's really important that you're thinking about how you're utilizing them and mobilizing them to help you in the way you need to be helped. I know, historically, for a lot of the organizations I've worked for, these event committees have been focused on those event logistics and picking the napkin colors and the menu and all that stuff. Now, I know for some organizations, you may not be able to get away from that completely, but I think, talking to this volunteer structure around your event about serving as event ambassadors as opposed to event committee is so much better for the professionals. Because like you said, some nonprofits don't have a development team and they may have 5 people who work there total. your time is so valuable. You cannot be spending it, you know, dealing with all the egos and the back and forth with, you know, all these opinions from all these committee members on things that are not important. I'm sorry, but napkin colors are not important. So I think, you know, thinking about your volunteers as being outward facing as opposed to inward facing, and empowering them to understand that their role with you is to connect the organization to their networks, that is so important and impactful for the organization. And that's something that the organization cannot do. They can't do that. They don't have those connections in the community the way the people do. So if those people really want to support the nonprofit as much as they say they do, that's where you guys need the help. And you have to have the confidence to have that conversation with them and tell them, this is what we need your help with. And these are the things we don't need your help with. I think that's really, really important. And setting expectations in the beginning so that everyone understands what they're being asked to do, what the professional's role is versus the volunteer, so that they know, okay, the professional has all this covered, so I don't have to worry about those things. I'm going to spend my time reaching out to my friends, you know, having coffee with them, telling them about this organization that I care so much about, and I want them to know about it. And then, you know, having another conversation, inviting them to an event. So when they get the email, it's not the first time they've heard about it. Like having the step-by-step process and laying that out for your volunteers so that they feel like they have all the tools they need to do what you're asking them to do. And I think that's another part of being donor-centric, is creating an engagement toolkit to give to your board, to give to your event committee or event ambassadors, so that they don't have to create it on their own. You're giving them all the tools for success that they need. And you're trying not to take too much of their time. You're preparing them to go out and have these conversations and making them feel really comfortable to do that. And I also think it's important to be very clear that you're not asking them to ask people for money. You're asking them to connect people to the cause that you care about, because that money is not going to them. The money is going to the organization. And I think people get really hung up on that. They're afraid to have these conversations about the organizations they care so much about, because they don't want their friends to think they're asking them for money. But that's not what you're doing. You're asking your friends to support a cause that is impacting our community and doing great work for our community. All in the framing and all in how you have that. And that's, you know, kind of an orientation that you could give to that group, so that they feel really comfortable having those conversations, and then they can empower more people to do that.
I really like the reframing of the from event committee or event volunteer to organizational ambassador. It helps to reframe really what we hope happens from an event, that a person, a community member comes, learns more, falls in love with what's happening at an event, comes and learns more about an issue and deeply cares about that. And that concept of an ambassador really highlights that. It also appears to me that it would be significantly more accessible to all different sizes of nonprofits, making sure that you have this ambassador role as opposed to the lift of trying to create an army just in time for an event. And so I really appreciate that. So we are at audience Q&A time, and we already have some questions and answers in the box, but this is your moment. If you want to ask questions, go ahead and put more of those in the Q&A box. We have 4 there, and we actually have one that's in the chat, and I'm going to lead with the one in the chat because it's a question that I had as well. The sort of algorithm that you provided us around how to know when it's time to go with an event versus when it's not, that you said that JewishColumbus uses. Can you talk a little bit more about that algorithm and those reflective questions that you ask in order to decide when it's time to go with an event?
Yeah, I mean, it was a hard thing, and I like I said, it really came about because I remember, I remember a couple years ago, we were all sitting in the boardroom, and I put, those giant Post-it things that you can put up on your whiteboard. And I did one for every month of the year. And I wrote down every event that was on the calendar in a different color, depending on the department it was coming from. And there was one month, I think it was May, that had like a million things on that list. And I was just like, you guys, we cannot do this. It is too hard on us. And we're asking too much of our donors. Like, do we really want them to see our emails and just hit delete because they just can't take another thing from us? So, we have to all remember that our donors, they don't only care about us. They have a million things they care about. It could be other nonprofits, and it could be, things in their family and their work and all, millions of other things. So you have to be really thoughtful about that. So that's why that 3-phase process kind of came to be. And, when we were starting to pull back on in-person events and focusing more on virtual events, that was another part of it too, because we realized, in the beginning, not every event that we had on the books could be pivoted into a virtual event. It just didn't lend itself that way. And we realized that, virtual event fatigue is a real thing. And if we're going to do these events, we need to make sure that they're really like a priority for us. And I think now going into, thinking about doing in-person events again, I think that still applies. I think we have to be really clear, number one, on why we're doing an event. And is bringing people together in person or virtual, is that a huge priority for building those relationships and connecting people to our work? You have to really be honest with yourselves about it and make sure that that's the case. I wish I could remember all the reflective questions that were on that list. I'm happy to send them to you, Danielle, so that you could kind of send them out to everybody. But I mean, they're really like common sense kind of things like, does it make sense to be doing this at this time of year? Is this going to further our, our priorities at this time? Is this event reflective of our strategic plan? All those things. And at JewishColumbus, we went through a whole kind of rebrand is not the right word, but kind of restructuring around our strategy and our strategic pillars. And we've kind of said, like, these are the things that everything has to come through this. And, now that we're also starting to talk about JewishColumbus Journeys, which is our missions program that I've started and stopped launching like 5 times. We had a trip planned for Israel in 2020, which obviously didn't happen. But I think the same holds true for that. We really, when we had planned that trip originally, we had this really interesting itinerary of all these things to do in Israel. And I just kept feeling this disconnect. I just kept thinking, what do all these things have to do with JewishColumbus? Like, it's great, but JewishColumbus isn't a travel agency. Like, we provide these missions so that we can further develop our relationships with our donors and to connect them to Israel, because some of the money they give goes there. But there was a disconnect. And during the pandemic, I took a step back from it because we obviously weren't going anywhere, to really develop a mission strategy. And the same thing that I do for events, I decided to do for missions, and I decided to set goals. Why are we doing missions? Why is that important? What are our priorities? And how does it fit within our strategic pillars? And, I met with our board and the people who are really involved to talk them through it and make sure that they bought into it, get their feedback and insight, so that when we actually do end up being able to go abroad again, when we plan that itinerary, everyone knows it is, it has to come back. Everything comes back to JewishColumbus. We have to have that connection to JewishColumbus. And I think that was one of those silver linings of the pandemic. It gave me an opportunity to develop that strategy so that when we do actually launch the program, it is connected in the way it needs to be.
Okay, thank you for that. And we have some interesting questions in the chat box that are around how to transition an event into a fundraiser that may or may not have already been. What do event sponsorships look like and how to better engage those, and essentially how to fundraising event, if you can answer that.
Yeah, there's a lot of steps that go into that. One thing I'll say off the top is statistically, and I don't remember where this statistic came from at this point in my career, but statistically, fundraising events do not make a profit until 3 years into your event. So the most important thing is to start small. We all have seen these big gala events and they're gorgeous and all have all these, bells and whistles. You cannot start there. You really need to think about what are the steps we need to take to get to that point, if that's where we want to go. And that really comes from having conversations with your board and making sure that you have leaders on your board who are going to champion, creating an event or creating an experience that's going to connect more people to the work that you do. And you have to start small. At JewishColumbus, we call them parlor meetings, porch, there's all different names for those, but like asking different board members to, host a gathering of their friends, like 10, 15 people at their home. You could do them when it gets warm out and have them under a tent or something and call them under the tent gatherings or whatever, get creative. And the idea is that you have someone who's already, connected to the mission, and they're just inviting their friends to learn more about it. You have the CEO or the chief development officer or whoever is the best person to speak about the organization, come and talk for 5 minutes. There is no ask that is made at these meetings. It is wine and cheese, hear about this organization I care about, meet this person, that's it. That's a good stepping stone to start with. And then following up with people afterwards. And then when eventually they get an invitation to your event, they not only remember the organization, but they connect it back to their friend. And like I said before, at the end of the day, people go to events because their friends ask them to, not because of the organization. I guarantee you, any event that you do, when people go, for the most part, they might have no idea what the mission is for the organization. They went because their friend asked them to. So that's really the key. And that's where you have to start. You have to start small, work with that team and build towards, something bigger.
I keep going back to this. This is really where my head is most of the time, but there's such accessibility for nonprofits in what you just said around really the concept of friend building and friend raising, with your local, connections, your local community hosting things on the organization's behalf. A dinner party for 5 over here, a lunchtime situation over here that doesn't require the lift of a gala, but also is very much more intimate and builds the relationships, the longevity of relationships that are needed. But they also, they aren't as costly as big giant events, which I think make those really ideal for smaller organizations, more lean staff-wise organizations. So we also have some questions for some folks who have acknowledged that we will likely be bouncing back and forth between the need for virtual and in-person, or some organizations may serve people who are, medically vulnerable and need to stick with virtual events. How do we really make those events engaging if we know that they're necessary?
2 things. I think if you have a population that that can't come to in-person events, I think you might want to try to figure out a different way to engage them. An event might not, you don't have to do an event to engage people. One example I can give from JewishColumbus, last last year, who knows what years were anymore, but in the fall, we were talking about doing an event for our major donors. The year before, we had done that virtually, and it was really successful. We had a great turnout, people loved it, but we just felt like it wasn't going to be as successful again. And if we're going to do an event for our major donors, it has to be in person. And if we can't do it in person, then maybe we shouldn't do an event. So I came up with the idea of coffee and conversations. And what we did, instead of doing an event, we sent an invitation that looked like a real event invitation. I think we did it through Paperless Post. And we had a link on there, like a sign up genius, that people could sign up for a time to have coffee and conversation with someone on our development team or with a board member. In advance, we kind of blocked time on those people's schedules so that it would connect to their calendar and they would be able to sign up for a time. We realized that, yes, we could do an event, but we're going to have to follow up with them to close their gift anyway. So why not skip the event that's not really going to help us that much and just have those conversations? Like, you know, it simplified things. We ended up sending a box to them in advance. We had 2 different boxes. One had a card that thanked our donors who had already closed their gifts, so they still got this gift. And what was in it? I actually have it here. We did a coffee canister with, this is me and my husband, that was personalized. And notice the Jewish Columbus logo is not on here. We wanted to do something that was personalized for them that they might want to put on their counter. You know, they might not want something with our logo sitting on their counter. And then we also sent Israeli coffee with that card. And then for people that actually ended up scheduling their meetings, when if they ended up being in person, I'm actually using this now. We brought these Yetis to them. It says give, lead, inspire, which are our pillars. So we brought this to them as a gift. Obviously, you know, those things cost money, but we decided that that's where we wanted to invest. Instead of spending money on event logistics, we spent it on something like that. And for our major donors, it was worth it to us because of the small group that it is and the connection that we were creating. It was really worth it for us to do that. And we had such a positive response. People really appreciated not having to go to another event. They just wanted to talk about, you know, what they cared about and where they, you know, see their dollars going in the future and all of those things. So it was really successful.
I really appreciated the positioning of events for this conversation away from, I think sometimes, at least in my experience, I've noticed that some nonprofits feel a pressure to do an event, and I'm putting the air quotes, so you think about the galas and things. There's a pressure there. This is the thing we're supposed to do. And I love that we're talking about all these other types of things as events, these coffee chats. If a nonprofit isn't able to provide a gift in that way, I think that's totally fine. But being available to have the conversation and build relationships with people so that they understand and care about the mission, I think is a really excellent way to frame events. We have you looks like you were going to say something.
Just one last thing too. I think another thing, and this is all about framing and what you call things again, not everything needs to be an event. Event can be scary to people. Sometimes it could be a meeting. It doesn't have to be an event. You know, if you're bringing people together to learn about something, that doesn't have to be an event. It's a meeting or a briefing or, you know, something like that. It's how you, like what you call it is important. And just, you know, think about it. Is this an event or is this a meeting? You know, there's a difference, and one has more stress or build up than another. So I think that's helpful to think about too.
Okay, so we have just 3 more questions. One is, if you choose to have just one event per year, what is the best time to hold your event? And I think the bigger question here is there a right timing for events?
I mean, that's very specific to every organization. It depends how your fiscal year runs. If it's January to December, that's one thing. If it's, you know, July to June, that's another. At JewishColumbus, we actually don't do fundraising events. Everything is focused on our individual donors and our annual campaign. So we look at it in the fall, because our fiscal year runs July 1st to June 30th. We look at it in the fall, let's do a campaign kickoff event. And in the spring, let's do a thank you event. So that's how we do it. It just really depends on, again, looking at your year as a whole. What if you need to do a fundraising event, what is that fundraising goal, and where does that fall in your annual campaign? If you're asking people for money separate from an event, where is that ask happening? And then where is the event happening? You just have to strategize. You can't think, well, we have to do our event in October. You have to look at everything and really think about how it's going to impact your goals for the year. And I think too, when you're looking at a fundraising event that's happened for a few years, when you're looking at fundraising, I think it's really important to put people into two buckets: renewals versus prospects. And once you look at your sponsors and your individuals and see what they gave in previous years, look at that, see how much money that adds up to, and then what's the delta between that and your fundraising goal. Then you have to decide, are there people on this list and companies on this list that we can ask for an increase? And then strategize around who is the best person to make that ask and how are we going to go about that? And then you look at your prospect list and see what is the strategy around turning some of these into gifts? Sometimes that might not happen right away. And there is nothing wrong with inviting people to an event, complimentary, so that they can, hear your story. And I think if your event is more focused on the schmooze and the storytelling, and you're not spending as much money on the food, then you don't have to worry about, bring all the people. I mean, that's good. You have to look at where is the person in the life cycle of becoming a donor? Are they a renewal? Are they a prospect? Where are they in that cycle? And meet them where they are and have those conversations appropriately.
So we have about 7 minutes left in our conversation. We still have quite a few really good questions here. The next one I want to ask you, and I think we'll have time for just 2 more, is is your perspective on asking the audience of your event or strategy around fundraising? What is your perspective on asking them what they want? And if you were going to do that, how would you do that? Do you think that's advisable?
Is the question, just to clarify, is the question asking, should we be asking people for money at the event?
No, the question is asking our prospective event attendees what kind of event they would like.
I don't think you want to ask your event attendees what kind of event they would like. I think that conversation is for the board and the professionals who would be putting the event together. That you need the buy-in from the board, because they're the ones who are going to be bringing in the people. And that's where the conversation should be. Decisions by committee, like napkin colors and all that stuff, and asking attendees what kind of event they want is just going to create a lot more work than you really want to have. I think if you're telling your story in a compelling way, people will be happy to come. They'll be happy to come again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The folks that work within the organization really know best the story that needs to be delivered. And the job is really to get our community members on board with your mission and what needs to be accomplished, as opposed to going the other way around and kind of trying to chase the thing that the community members may want. So making sure you have a focused story behind your organization, I think, is the key there. So we have a kind of a big conceptual question with our last few minutes, but I think it's important. What is your annual campaign like, or more generally, what is an annual campaign and how do nonprofits engage with this concept?
That's a good question. Annual campaigns are not my area of expertise. Um, there, there are consultants in town that focus on different methods of fundraising. And I think if an annual campaign is something that an organization really wants to develop as part of their organization, I would look to those people. Let me think. Plentiful is one of them. Carrie Millard is another consultant that I know really well. There's a lot of different consultants in that realm that could be really helpful. But an annual campaign, my loose definition is that, you have donors in your database that have given you a gift. You pull that list and you go through it and you reach out to them to have a conversation and ask them to make a gift again. I mean, that's what it is. It's an annual gift of support. People, because you have to remember, not everyone wants to come to an event, and that's not everyone wants to support your organization through an event. They might just want to give you money. And it's important to have a connection with them and talk to them about, why they made their gift. Where do they see their philanthropic dollars going in the next 5 years? What is something that's important to them? And I think it's important to make sure that that annual campaign is, kind of a big picture campaign, and those dollars are going into one pot. And then I know at JewishColumbus, we have a committee that's made up of staff and community members that helps us decide where we're going to invest the dollars into some of the different Jewish agencies in town. So that's how our campaign works. And we have a development team that each person on the team has a portfolio of donors. They're responsible for connecting with them. And it's really important that it's not just, hey, can you give $500 this year? I mean, that it has to be like, meeting with people, having those conversations. And sometimes it takes a few conversations before you get that gift. So that's my loose definition of it. I'm sure that other people could tell you more than I can.
Well, I think even that loose definition was really helpful and leans back to, if you are an org that is smaller, really leaning on those board members and other community volunteers that you have to help you manage building those relationships, because it can seem arduous, but finding folks that can help, I think, will be really important. So we have one last question, and that is advice you might give to an organization who needs to hire a consultant to help plan an event for the first time. Do you have any advice for those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I consult on the side. So I know how I approach those clients, and, because my focus is on event strategy and event planning, and that's because I've worked inside nonprofits for so long that's my wheelhouse. I understand, what it's like to be on a development team, how hard it is, how stressful that you have small budgets, time constraints, small staff, all those things. So I think when you're trying to figure out hiring a consultant for whatever part, whether it's for marketing or, a capital campaign for an event, you really want to talk to a few different people, but be really clear for yourselves what your needs are. Really have an understanding of what you're really looking for. I know for myself as an event planner, the difference between me and a typical event planner, I think, is that I have the strategy piece because of working inside nonprofits for so long. There are phenomenal event planners in town that focus solely on day of execution and coming up with really creative concepts and the flowers and all that stuff. I do all that stuff because that's important too. But for me, what happens before an event and after an event is sometimes more important than the event itself. So that's kind of that's my approach, and everyone has a different approach, and you kind of have to figure out like what's most important to you. Also thinking about, if you're a small staff, like, do we want someone that we can kind of plug into our team that really understands, the work we do and can be, a temporary fix if we're in between development directors or whatever. I mean, I think consultants are good for that. as well. So you're not rushing to hire someone new, you're taking time to figure out the right fit for you. A consultant can fill the gap sometimes in that way as well.
Okay, that was a great response, and especially the piece around workforce extension. We know that the development profession is experiencing high turnover right now, and that might be leaving a lot of our nonprofits in kind of a lurch. So knowing that you can lean on our consultants that way, I think is really helpful. That is pretty much all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us today. It was robust. There was a lot there. If you are willing to share with us the algorithm that you expressed, we had a few folks in the chat that were interested in seeing that. So I will receive that from you, and it will come out in the email that you'll get, that also has a link to this forum for you to watch later. And as always, please do go and check out our survey, complete it, and let us know how we did today. Let us know what you would like to see in the future. That will help us plan forums that are targeted to your needs. And with that, I think we're all done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.